In this video, I'm going to show you how to install the Honda trunk light. As you can see here, it really does light up the trunk, and I'll also show you how to install the sub-harness that's required to make the trunk light work. So let's get started.
This video is sponsored by Cruiseman's Garage Honda Goldwing Maintenance Video Series.
I also want you to notice I already have a towel set up over here on my tabletop on my workbench. This is where I'm going to be setting the trunk or the trunk lid once I remove it. The trunk lid has to be removed to install the trunk sub harness as well as the trunk light. Now I've already removed the passenger backrest, which is required to access these 6 bolts that I'm unscrewing now so that I can remove the trunk lid. Now I have a complete set of maintenance videos that shows in great detail how to perform all of these steps. So if you want more information, check that out. I'm going to go ahead and remove this one. Now I'm going to lean up against the trunk. You want to make sure you don't have a belt buckle in the way because you don't want to scratch anything. And I'm going to remove this last bolt on the left side. I'm removing all of these bolts with the trunk in the closed position. I have never done this before. This is the first time I tried it. I think it's actually easier to remove the trunk lid if the trunk lid is open. You want to make sure you're holding this trunk lid so it doesn't just fall off. I should also mention that I have all of my Allen wrenches magnetized, so you can see the bolt sticks to that Allen wrench when I remove it. That keeps you from dropping parts down into the bike. Now I'm going to carefully walk around while holding it in place so I get that last screw out of this side, still holding with my left hand. And remember, when this bolt comes out, that trunk lid is now free to come off. Okay. You always want to work on a large flat surface, and I prefer to put a towel or something down to protect the painted surfaces. Now we need to flip the trunk lid over. This is why you want to make sure you have a towel to protect that paint. And we want to now remove the inner liner of the trunk lid. I like to begin by removing the 4 screws that hold the trunk latch hooks in place. Now when you remove these hooks, I want you to pay attention to how they're positioned because they do have an angle to them. You'll notice that they slightly bend towards the rear of the motorcycle. It's very important that they go back in the same way they came out. So notice that little bend in the hook. They bend towards the rear of the motorcycle. Now these are self-tapping screws that hold the latch hooks in place, and I like to set them inside the trunk lid as I remove them. I don't want to set them on my towel because I don't want to accidentally move the trunk lid and have it get scratched by one of those screws laying on the towel. And now we're going to begin removing those 7 screws that hold the liner to the trunk lid. These are self-tapping screws. Once again, I will remind you that I do have detailed videos on my maintenance video series that go into a little more detail on removing the trunk lid and disassembling this inner liner. There are 7 screws, self-tapping screws that hold this liner in place. And these screws are slightly shorter than the ones that hold those latch hooks in place. So you want to make sure you use the proper screws when you go to reassemble. Okay, now we're going to separate the liner. Usually like to start at one of these back corners to separate it like this. Again, it's going to make some noise when it comes loose because these bosses are going to release from these holes. It can sometimes make a little racket. I'm trying not to move the painted surface on this towel any more than I have to. This one's coming out very, very easily compared to others I've worked on in the past. And just like that, the liner is out. Now I'm going to take this painted shell and I'm going to move it. I'm going to put mine inside the house on some carpet where it's in a safe place so that it won't get scratched. Our trunk sub harness is going to be sitting up in this area right here. And I know it may be tempting to put this down in this well, but I learned the hard way, you can't do that because the top of the trunk lid, the painted part, actually fits right down inside that well, so there's not enough room for this. It has to go just like they show it in the instructions, which is up here sitting on top of this high point right here. Now I will be installing the interior trunk light as part of this installation. So before I install the harness, I am going to go ahead and install that interior trunk light. If you're not going to be installing the interior trunk light, you can skip this section and move to the next section of the video, but it doesn't make much sense to go to all the trouble to install this trunk harness if you're not going to go ahead and put the little trunk light in. It's pretty cool because when you open the trunk, the light comes on automatically. Now it's very overpriced. It's way more than it should be. In fact, it should be included in the motorcycle, but I'm going to go ahead and open it up here and show it to you. And it's way too hard to install, but we're going to do it anyway. And this is the light right here. It's a little LED, and it is going to sit right down on these two little posts. But of course, we have to cut out this little piece of plastic, this little plug. And this wire goes right up here and will plug into our trunk harness. So the trunk light comes with some hardware, as you can see here, some washers, some spacers, and a couple of self-tapping screws. And it also comes with this little adhesive pad that's designed to hold the cable or the wire down, the wire harness. No instructions. Tells you where to get the instructions. On this address here, you can go to this website and download the instructions. Nice, Honda. Don't waste any money. It's a $79 product and they won't give you any instructions. So we'll get this adhesive pad out. Now you could, of course, use a Dremel tool to knock these little holders, these little plastic tabs that hold this plug in. You could use a little miniature X-Acto saw or something like that, but I just like to snip them out with these. And you can always come in with a file if you need to and file them off to get it a little bit flatter. But these do a pretty good job. The plastic's pretty soft. There we go. So that got that. And then you can see now how this light will just kind of sit right down there on top of that, like that right there. Let's grab our hardware. I've done this a few times, so I kind of can go from memory. So the light, here are your two posts, and it just sits right down on top like that. I'm going to put them flat side down or large diameter side down like that. And then there is another washer that you can put in between the screw and the top of this, and that will hold that down firmly in place. Now these are self-tapping screws. I would remind you and caution you again that you are screwing these into plastic, and the plastic is relatively soft. You never want to use a power screwdriver because you will always run the risk of over-tightening and stripping out those plastic threads. So you want to always do it by hand. And as soon as you feel just a little bit of resistance, that's enough. It doesn't have to be super tight. So that's on there now. It's not going anywhere. Now I cut that rubber pad, that rubber strip adhesive pad, I cut it into 3 separate pieces about the same size each. And I'm going to attach one down here to hold this in place. And then I'm going to have 2 up here. And that just holds this wire down to the trunk liner. And this stuff is pretty sticky. It's also a good idea, I forgot to do it down here, but it's a good idea to clean this with alcohol first. I'm just going to give it a good wipe down with some isopropyl alcohol. That way, if there's any wax or grease, that should give us a nice, clean, dry surface to stick our adhesive to.
If you're enjoying this video so far, please do me a favor, click that little subscribe button and don't forget the notification bell so that YouTube will let you know when we come out with more videos like this.
Okay, now we're going to turn our liner around. And now you can see that when we install our sub-harness, which will sit about right here, this is going to plug in right into this blue connector. Honda does color code it. Now these other 2 wires I don't really need. And these are for a spoiler light, or actually it's a luggage rack light. I could even cut this electrical tape and actually remove that because I don't need it. It's just added thickness, but I think I'll just go ahead and leave it. Once again, I'm going to cut this almost in perfect thirds. I'm going to try to guess at it here. Doesn't have to be perfect, but now here's the tricky part. This has to go down here and then make a bend and then go down into this little well here. There's a little cutout here. You can see this little scooped out part right here. And this is going to come around like this, and it's going to come down into that little cutout.
The next step is to remove this right side trunk side panel. This has to be removed because we have to route our wires from the trunk sub-harness down underneath this panel.
Okay, we need to remove 3 screws. These 3 screws here. These 2 screws do not need to be removed. They have the little outline around them, the border. Those can remain. So we just need to remove these 3 screws. They are small threads. I'm keeping everything in a cup. Oh, wrong one. And then you'll also see a little push pin rivet right here. Let's go ahead and take that out. And once again, on the right side floor of the trunk, you'll see 3 more of these push pin rivets, body clips, rivets. Those need to come out. To remove the side panel, start at the front top edge and begin releasing those clips. This panel will slide backward eventually because it does. There are some hooks that slip into little slots on the inner trunk liner. Next, we need to remove the right rear speaker cover. Now, I'm borrowing some footage from another motorcycle I worked on because my camera battery died and I did not get footage of it on my bike, but it works the same way. This is a 2023 model, same exact procedure. Inside the trunk toward the front of the trunk, you'll see 2 self-tapping screws which hold the trunk center panel in place. We'll need to remove that little panel. And once you remove those 2 screws, that little panel just comes right off. How do we remove the speaker grill? Well, first we have to remove that side cover that you see here that we just removed. So the side cover has to come off first. And you'll notice there is a Phillips screw or a JIS screw up here on top. There is another one right here. So there are 2 JIS screws on each side of this hinge. Then down here on the bottom edge, there's one of those little push pin rivet snap clips, and we have to remove that. Okay, first I'm going to remove this JIS screw right here. You'll see that is one of the shorter screws. So those 2 screws are the same, and they are the shorter screws. And you can see this is already starting to come loose. Now we just need to get that push pin rivet out. So the speaker grill just comes right off. Okay, this is the boot where you're going to find the connector for the trunk harness. The problem is it is buried way down inside that boot. It's almost impossible. You can't even really see it from here. I don't know if you can see that white connector down there. I believe that is the one we want. Now, what I did is I went ahead and removed this passenger grab rail, took these 2 10mm bolts out, just so I'd have easier way to get to this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use a pair of hemostats, see if I can get down in there and pull that connector out so I can get better access to it. There it is. Okay, there is the connector finally. At least now we can get to this connector and this cap comes off, and this is what our trunk sub harness will plug into. And once we plugged it in, we'll push everything back down into that little void, pull that boot back over it, and we'll be good to go. This is why I highly recommend a pair of hemostats. I have two pair. I have one that has a curved tip, and this is the straight tip, and these things are invaluable. It's one of my most used tools. After reinstalling the trunk lid, I route the wires from the sub-harness as the instructions indicate, wrapping them around that right speaker and underneath so that they come out underneath the seat. Now what we have to do is we have to go back to that connector that we found earlier, and we've got to remove the cap that's on that connector and install this in its place. And it is rather hidden. Okay, you will find a tab on one side, and I believe this one you have to lift up with your finger. Just get your fingernail under there and you'll lift that tab up, and that cap will just pop right off. And I always like to save these caps. You never know. Here you can see the end of the trunk sub-harness once it's been installed and routed underneath that right side speaker. I've already reinstalled the speaker grill, and now we just need to connect this to the motorcycle's harness. You just never know when you're going to need them. Okay, so this is the harness from my Pathfinder. So let's come in here and we will pop this down on here like this. And that is now connected. And now we can tuck all of this back into that boot and kind of shove it back where it was, next between the frame and the saddlebag. Once you get it down there, you can pull that boot up over those connectors like that. The main thing to remember at this point is you don't want any wires to prevent you from reinstalling the passenger handrail and, of course, the seat. So you don't want anything over the frame rails that when you put the seat on it could crimp or pinch or cut the wires. Now that your trunk sub-harness is connected, you might want to turn the bike on, make sure the trunk light lights up when you open the trunk before you reinstall the passenger grab rail and the seat. Yeah, now we're in good shape.
Once again, I'll remind you, for complete details and information on how to do all these things, check out my maintenance video series. But if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. That really does help my YouTube rankings.